Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. We've got another guest episode for you here today, and I'd like to welcome onto the show this time around Dan Gianfreda, who has recently actually been appointed CEO of eSourcing platform DeepStream. Dan, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, James. Absolutely, really happy to be here. Excited to go through this podcast with you.
So when we were speaking about doing this, I actually really liked what you were looking to do as a concept in terms of the title. So we're going to dig in a little bit about moving from reactive to proactive procurement and digging into why some of the reasons around why e-sourcing tools often have a low adoption rate and don't succeed out there in the field. But before we do that, I just want to do a quick icebreaker, first of all. So let's imagine you're a CPO in a mid-sized business and you've got no digital procurement tools currently in place. So you've come into a greenfield role, and by way of a miracle, you've managed to convince the CFO to give you $50,000 to go out and buy some procurement tech. So what would you spend it on?
Well, I wouldn't actually think of it in those terms. I'd approach it in a slightly different way. Rather than thinking I've got 50K to spend, I'd be thinking, what's our absolute key must-win battles from a procurement and a business perspective? Like, what are our absolute most serious challenges? What are key objectives? And what are the associated key success metrics? As in, what does success look like? So, and then I'd be looking at the market to try and find the least amount of easy to use tech that I could possibly implement in order to achieve our goals. And I'd be very wary when I'm looking at the market to ensure that it's not just the best kind of tech solution, but also that the tech solution meets our maturity as an organization, as a procurement function, and in terms of our users as well. So I really wouldn't be thinking about the 50K. And if I had some cash left over, instead of spending it and risking, tech overwhelm, I'd just keep it in my back pocket until we've succeeded with that first phase. And then I'd release more budget to kind of expand from there.
Yeah, it's an interesting answer. And I would completely concur with you in the sense that a lot of companies do overestimate the maturity or the ability of their organization to adopt certain levels of technological complexity within a procurement software platform. So yeah, I can completely see where you're coming from with that. So you're a bit of an industry veteran. Before we hit record, actually, you were just telling me the story of how you came to work with DeepStream initially, and then obviously you've become CEO just recently. Give us a quick overview of your background, because I do think it's relevant and important for setting the scene on what we're going to cover in the episode today.
Yeah, so I've been in ProcureTech for the past 12 years. And in that time, I've had various roles, including sales and marketing, director of customer success, chief customer officer, and now I'm absolutely delighted to be CEO at DeepStream. Throughout my career in SaaS and in ProcureTech, I've mainly been focused on really trying to find a way to, just think outside the box and find proactive, innovative ways to really drive customers to succeed, as opposed to just kind of reactively supporting them to succeed. Because every provider is going to have organically a subset of the customers who are going to succeed with their software. But for me, it's all about proactively, relentlessly, systematically driving customers to succeed. So, maximizing the percentage of customers that succeed and succeed materially. And what I loved about, taking over as CEO at DeepStream, my first action literally in the meeting where it was announced that I was stepping into the CEO role, it was to align all departments around this core objective. So our core maniacal focus is around maximizing customer value realization. And that's our number one focus. And that's A, because that should be the main aim of the entire B2B SaaS industry. But B, because I know that if we get that right, then everything else will follow as a consequence.
and your churn should be very low as well, which is also an important metric, isn't it? It's
exactly.
Yeah. So we actually had Aidan from DeepStream on the podcast back in autumn 2021, so about 3 years ago. And lots obviously changed since then. DeepStream was a pretty new product on the market back when Aidan spoke to me back then. Your background obviously means that you're one of few people that works in, or that has worked in the sales and growth space for startups and scale-ups who's got deep experience of this industry. So where do you think the market is heading more holistically? What are you seeing out there? Not just necessarily in the eSourcing space, but in ProcureTech in general.
Well, obviously, eSourcing is my area of expertise and source to contract. But I would say in general, I'm very glad to see that there is more of a push that the industry is moving more towards a focus around value realization. And I think that's really important. And I also think there's definitely a trend moving towards Dr. Eloise Epstein's ecosystem vision of integrated best of breed solution providers. And I'm really glad to see that's happening because, as you'll know, 70% of digitalization programs fail. And that's largely due to, like, for years, and it's still happening now, of course, the overselling and the hype from the provider side, especially big tech, and subsequently poor change management from the buy side, but that's another topic. And essentially, trillions are being wasted on failed digital initiatives. I mean, one of our adverts around this is that it's essentially the biggest heist in history, the amount of money that's being wasted on failed initiatives. And it's because big tech sales and marketing play is convincing procurement teams that they need to fully digitalize in one go with one provider. And they're making promises of epic transformations that normally result in epic failures. And that's also started over the years to trickle down to the smaller providers because they need to kind of compete and say, well, yeah, we don't just do this one narrow section of what you need. Now we do this module and now we do that module. And often it's like modules that have been kind of slapped on the side of their core function. So anyway, I feel as though, with all of that, buyers get hoodwinked into thinking that they need to kind of future-proof against all potential eventualities rather than just focusing on exactly what they need right now and focusing on the provider that's most likely, selecting the provider that's most likely to help them solve their current challenges in the best way possible. Essentially, they're sacrificing the present for the future, but often they don't even get to the future of the initiative because the reality is that a lot of the tech will just sit on the shelf and the buy side will suffer from tech overwhelm and inadequate change management. And then 3 years later, they'll be going back to the market, but this time to find the right solution, the right provider, the right tech fit for their needs and maturity. So that's a really long way of saying, and I'll just circle back to the fact that, I do think that it's slowly starting to move in that direction to say we've been burnt once, we've been twice maybe. Now we've wisened up to that and we're making sure we're taking a more measured approach and ensuring that we execute and succeed solidly before moving on to expanding.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there around change management within procurement teams or within the customer organization. And that is a big one, isn't it? But again, as a software solution provider, you can only control what you can control. And that's always going to be, to a certain extent, outside of your control, depending on who's managing that. And I do think as well, your point around best of breed and suites, I was always, still am to a large extent, a big advocate of the best of breed approach. But I do also see where the suites have a place in this ecosystem, especially more on the enterprise side, more on the large corporate side where you've got a lot more complexity. But then I also think that even if you do have that type of product in situ, can never be everything to everybody. And there's always going to be a place for certain best of breed applications that just do certain aspects of source to pay or source to contract or third party risk management, ESG, whatever it is, cheaper, faster, better than what the suite can do, because the suite is just a monolith, isn't it? And it can never move as quickly as a more agile best of breed solution. So I do see, and I've come around a little bit more recently to where I think suites could have a place in future. But yeah, I do go along with that.
I'd just like to challenge a couple of things. You said that one around change management, you can only control what is in like your control. I agree. You can only control like the controllable, but I would disagree that most providers, like, I don't think they're trying hard enough to challenge and guide and drive the customer to succeed. So you can't say, oh, well, we've done the training. We've told them we're here to support them. For me, it starts even before the sale is completed in making sure, in our sales process, we make it very clear that we say like 70% of digitalization programs in general fail. They fail for these reasons. These are our solutions. If you like, our most successful customers go through these processes. They have senior management active involvement. They work with us diligently to drive change management from both sides. We are very, very clear about what the key objectives and challenges are and what success looks like. And then we co-create a success plan. So, from before the sale actually goes through, we're making sure that we're kind of conditioning the customer to realize like this isn't just going to succeed by itself. It's not about just implementing training and then magically everything turns to gold. It takes work, it takes planning, it takes great execution to drive that success. So I think there's more providers can be doing to kind of influence the customer to do the right things from their side.
Yeah, I concur with that. And that was kind of going to be my next question, actually. What else do you feel beyond, DeepStream is known actually for being best in class when it comes to UI, UX, and especially for organizations that have relatively small or perhaps immature procurement teams. That is key. That's without that, you're setting yourself up to fail. But based on what you just said, do you find then that your customers are usually quite receptive to that approach, or do you sometimes hit the brick wall of we don't need that, we know what we're doing, leave it to us, we know our organization better than you do?
It's a great question. It's taken me a long time to realize that it's almost, I'm not saying it's pointless, but it's almost pointless trying to drive that behavior when the customer is already a legacy customer. It's very, very difficult to get things back to where they should have started from. But what I've found at DeepStream is since I've come on and we've introduced this into the sales process, it's been, I've got to say that like the customers that we've won during this period, it's been the dream in the sense of they have been fully aligned with us in the sales process. And when we've handed it over to customer success, we've got senior management involved and knowing they're going to play an active role throughout the relationship. There's clearly defined objectives, success metrics, and clear plan around like we start to formulate the plan together around like this partnership of driving it from both sides, because we can only do so much, as you said earlier. So that's where we really need to lean on the customer to make sure that they are, for example, the most senior stakeholder is saying, this is why we've decided to digitalize. We're doing it because these are key business challenges, which then feed into these or kind of drive these key procurement objectives. We've selected DeepStream for these reasons. And this is what we're expecting of all of the users in terms of showing up for training. We want everyone to run an event through the solution before the end of the quarter. And then moving forward, we'll be ramping that up as an example. But these are the kinds of things that it's been an absolute dream. The last several customers that we've won, adopting that process in the sales cycle.
And getting them on board at that point, just so as you know that you're not going to get a customer that's going to send a blanket email out to all of their stakeholders with a link to a SharePoint with all the training manuals on and say, there you
go. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that we've cracked it, but this is something that I wish I'd realized years ago, because, when I was just responsible for customer success, I was just getting the kind of receiving the customers. And by that time, it was kind of too late. Whereas when I moved into a more of a CRO role, etc., I was able to control that whole process and influence that whole process. And now at DeepStream, I really feel as though it's that approach is paying dividends.
And your customer base is often growing companies or maturing companies in terms of their journey, isn't it? So that can be, I suspect, both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in the sense that it's great that you're getting them while they're fairly greenfield, but I guess to your point around having a more end-to-end sort of customer success strategy, you're going to have to do a little bit of, more than a bit of hand-holding along the way to make sure that their whole organization gets it and comes with you along that journey. So as procurement does start to mature, and especially if we're looking at high growth companies, when they start to plateau, procurement then becomes more embedded in the organization as a respected business partner, because businesses then move from growth at all costs to having to control their costs. And that's where procurement is key, right? So why would you say then that it's often counterproductive for them to go out and look for a bells and whistles software solution at that point?
I mean, it depends on the maturity of the organization again, and the maturity of the procurement department and their users. But, for these larger suites, I've seen reports, and I haven't got exactly the stats, but it's something, I think it fits pretty well with the Pareto rule of about 20% of the functionality ends up being used from the larger suites. So it just doesn't make sense to select a provider based upon the volume of features and the number of bells and whistles, because in many cases, you won't even get to use those. My advice is that, is to conquer the basics first, get the value first, then expand. And bells and whistles definitely have their place. Like if you're moving on a 5-level maturity scale, if you're moving from a 4 to a 5, then in most cases, you're going to want those bells and whistles. But if you're moving from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3, I would highly recommend not letting them distract you and just achieve your core objectives, solve your core challenges first. Walk before you run, before you fly.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It all seems pretty logical to me. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, Dan. So I had a conversation recently at ProcureCon in Barcelona with a senior guy from Cooper, and we were having lunch together, and we both sort of knew who each other were, but we'd never actually met in person. And great guy, actually. We didn't agree on everything that each other says, but we had a really good conversation about this. And he was saying, well, you can't manage 10 different best of breed applications and do it properly. And that he was alluding more to sort of larger businesses. I'll give you that. But how would you sort of counter that argument? Because that's what, if you're coming up against one of the suites, the salesperson for the suite is going to say exactly that to the head of procurement.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, yes, it definitely is easier to manage one relationship, one contract, and know everything's under one solution. You can't dispute that. However, is ease the most important thing, or is results and success the most important thing? Is user adoption the most important thing, and really getting the results and the desired outcomes that you are implementing the solution for in the first place? So I think with the suites, they are made up of multiple apps that have been acquired over the years in most scenarios. And those solutions have just been stitched together, normally quite quickly, so they can move on to the next one. But they've got often illogical workflows and mismatched UIs. And also, the data is not necessarily integrated perfectly either. On top of that, I think it's really fair to say that those solutions, once acquired, are not innovating as rapidly as they were before they were part of the suite. So for me, it's a case of, you still, if you buy a suite, you're still buying multiple solutions with imperfect, kind of illogical workflows, imperfect data integration, and mismatched UIs. So it's not really like a case that you're just buying one solution and everything is going to be harmonized. So, I would say with best of breed, at least that each provider is out there. They're normally startups and scale-ups that are just fighting to be the best that they can be. They've got little technical debt. They're trying to be as innovative as possible. They've got great expertise in that particular narrow area to really help drive success. And, integrations are becoming easier and faster. For example, at DeepStream, we've got a dedicated integrations team that is just systematically going through integrating with one partner after another based upon what we think brings most value to our customer base. So I would say there's strengths and weaknesses for both approaches. And I'm not here to say that suites, down with suites, they're no good for anybody. They're absolutely the right fit for organizations that are geared up to succeed with them, and ones that are mature enough and have enough time, enough resource, and enough money to get that implementation and the transformation done properly. But I think for most cases, for mid-market organizations, best of breed, one or two at a time, and biting it off in bite-sized chunks succeeding, and then expanding is, and finding the best solution and best fit for you for each element is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with you in terms of the legacy source to pay suites. I think all of those, with the exception of iValuer, have grown by acquisition in some way. And whether all of the different modules speak to one another flawlessly, I would not want to speculate, but I get where you're coming from. I think it would be interesting. I think it's too early to tell at the moment, but it'd be interesting to see where some of these intake solutions land in that landscape. Not so much the more process orchestration focused ones, but more of the ones that are looking to do like intake to pay end to end. Zip being the obvious example, but there are others out there as well, and Pivot and Omnia in Europe as well that have entered this space. I think that area is an interesting one to watch over time, because that potentially, or maybe we'll see a new Gen AI driven from the ground up source to pay suite that's going to be built, that's able just at a pricing and a technology level to come into to the mid market and be competitive without having to look at the more enterprise focused suite. So it is a changing landscape now. It's been pretty static for a number of years, but the last 2 or 3 years, there's certainly been some disruption there. Is there a level of maturity or business size then that you think a business would need to be at before they could make use of a suite or even one of these new process orchestration type applications out there? Do you think there is a natural cutoff point, or is it more just around organizational maturity and centralization of procurement?
Well, I think for the suites, that is absolutely, I think, it makes a lot of sense for the largest organizations, as I said, with the biggest budgets and the resource and the time. Those suites can take, more than a year to implement.
Yeah, time's a big one, isn't it? Often doesn't get considered. Yeah. And then, if you think it takes a year to implement, or even sometimes more than that, the amount of money that's spent on the implementation and the licenses, etc., and the number of times that I've seen organizations just come back to market 3 years later because it just didn't take off. It's a phenomenal waste of time and money. But going back to your question though, is if you've got that time, that money, that resource, somebody who's going to spend like a year really focused on, a team of people who are going to be focused on implementing change management, transformation, getting everything right, getting everything aligned, then, that is that's going to be the right approach for many of those organizations. Having said that, I know lots of large organizations who have decided that best of breed is the right approach even for them, because they just want to be able to handpick the solutions that they want to use for the different areas and stitch them together either themselves or using the integrations of the ecosystem best of breed partners. And then there's also the new approach with that I know that enterprise are using around the tech garage, the exact term, where they're just enabling, making available multiple different solutions for their users to be able to go in and choose their own. So they'll have multiple eSourcing solutions they can use, multiple P2P solutions, multiple whatever. And so I just think, there's not one size fits all. And I think anybody who tries to say that their solution's the best solution for everybody they're not being honest, they're not being realistic. The whole reason there's so many solutions in the marketplace is because one size doesn't fit all. For one type of customer, they'll see our solution and it'll be exactly what they're looking for, and they'll know the first time they see it. And we just know we're a great fit, and we end up winning that customer usually very quickly. For others, they'll see the solution and think that's not the right solution for them, and that's absolutely fine. So I just think if you're locking yourself into a suite and you've got to use the prescribed solutions across all of the different processes for all of those different people, it's unlikely that all of them are going to fit, and it's all unlikely that they're all going to be the best tech fit for all of those elements. Yeah, I completely agree, Dan. Can't fault what you just said there. So walk me through an example in a practical sense of how your approach of maturing along with your customers, where features get unlocked along their journey to organizational maturity. When they start off simple and gradually you can scale up and increase the complexity of the software with them. Walk me through how it would work in a practical sense, and what would then trigger the different gates at which, they would unlock more features. And I assume, a higher tier of pricing as well, or without revealing anything confidential around your pricing strategy?
Yeah. So essentially, I get involved in every sales process as CEO and also previously as CRO, just to ensure that we're a good fit, that we're not overselling, and that we can definitely help them achieve their goals. We go really deep on the challenges and objectives and the key success metrics so that we've got a really clear picture of what it is that we're wanting to achieve. And then we understand, we've got like a quiz and also just a few slides and some questions that we can ask to really help determine where the customer is in terms of procurement and digital maturity, where their users are in terms of digital and procurement maturity. And then we will propose the lightest package possible to meet their needs. And, we often get pushback from the customer who say they want to go for the higher package. And if that's the case, then that's fine. But we do recommend going for the lowest package that will meet your needs now. And then you can easily expand and unlock more functionality, more tech when you've succeeded. So then we just hyper-focus. Both sides are hyper-focused on making sure they get excellent time to value so that they succeed quickly. And we've got reports that show us like which functionality is being used by which customers. And then we use that to build prompts to drive more usage of the key functionality that we know drives more value. And then customer success are always working diligently to drive that as well. And then once we feel as though that the customer's achieving their goals and they've got this solution deeply embedded and they're getting more expert in it, that's when we would look at expanding. And we would only initiate the conversation of expanding once we can see that. There are times that customers come to us and say, look, we've got another key objective that we've got to kind of focus on right now. Can you help us with it? And obviously, if they want us to, we will. But for us to actually initiate the conversation of expansion, we wouldn't do that until we know that they're really achieving success. And, partially it is because it's the right thing to do. And it's what makes perfect sense. Like, I don't want to come across as though we're trying to be like super benevolent, but like genuinely, that is like a massive part of the reason for why we're doing it. But as I said earlier, it also makes perfect business sense. Why would you try and win customers that you're going to lose in a year's time or 3 years, or customers that need to downgrade? And why get a bad name in the market? Why have such a small percentage of your customers that can act as references because you've oversold or because they haven't succeeded? For me, it just makes perfect business sense, as well as being the right thing, that you just give them the implement and succeed with the smallest amount of tech needed to help them succeed, and then expand from there. And I just think that makes a huge amount of sense and is good business acumen.
Thank you, Dan. So just conscious of the time, need to wrap this up. So a couple of quick fire questions at the end that I do with every guest. So don't think about them too much. Just give us the answer that pops into your head. So first one is, if you could live anywhere in the world and money were no object, where would it be?
Sardinia, for sure. I'm half Italian. I've got family that live in Sardinia, and Sardinia, I don't know if you've ever been, is absolutely stunning. And obviously the food's amazing. So Sardinia.
I haven't. I've been to Italy many times, but not been to Sardinia. So based on that last answer, I think I could probably guess this one, but what's your favorite guilty pleasure? And there's only one rule here. You've got to keep this clean.
I know exactly what it is, and I can't believe I'm admitting it, but I'm a massive foodie. I love food, quality food. Like, it's so important to me. And yet my big guilty pleasure has got to be doner kebab. Like, I just love a way of having a doner kebab at least once a month, because I just absolutely love them, as awful as that is.
I recently got back from a business trip to Germany. That's why I'm laughing at this. And guess what the first meal was when I got off the train?
Doner kebab?
Yeah. Alrighty. So just for anyone that's listening to this, we actually did a live stream with DeepStream on this topic where we digged in and did a bit of a software demo as well as a webinar. So we'll link to that as well in the show notes if you're curious to have a little bit of a look under the hood at DeepStream's UI UX, as well as a conversation with Dan and his colleague Aidan from the DeepStream team. So we'll link to that in the show notes. Last question, Dan, apart from that recent live stream, where's the best place that we should send our listeners if they'd like to connect or learn a bit more?
Really just our DeepStream Tech.com website, or look us up on LinkedIn. They're the two best places to find us.
Got it. Okay, Dan, been a pleasure. And next time I meet you in person, we'll go and have a kebab.
Sounds good. Thanks, James.
Okay, guys and girls, just before we wrap up for today, don't forget that we have a growing library of tech maps where on one single sheet, we've got all of the logos that you need to find whatever type of technology or whatever type of business you're in. We've got SME, mid-market and enterprise tech on separate tech maps. And we've just started building our tech map library of specific category solutions as well that you can download in our store at store.procurementsoftware.site. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back again same time next week. Until then, take care wherever you are around the world and bye for now.